Well, good morning. I'm really delighted to be here, and I have to say, absolutely delighted that we now have one organisation. I'm often asked, how did I ever become interested in scleroderma? That's numerous years ago, but very interesting. When I was just qualified as a doctor, I was then called a houseman. I admitted a young woman of 26 when I was on duty at night with dreadful renal scleroderma. And I had no idea how to look after her, but neither did anybody else in the professorial team. I asked my boss what we were going to be able to use, and he said, we have nothing. And that young woman never left the hospital. And it really, I couldn't believe there was a disease for which you could do absolutely nothing if they had renal failure. At that time, there was no opportunity to really do anything other than palliative care. So that's how I became interested in scleroderma. And for the two societies, the Scleroderma Society had part of its birth in a woman called Amy Dean. We sat in my front room and we talked about developing this. She was passionately interested in developing a society. Amy had dreadful interstitial lung disease. She did live to see it formed, but was very quickly after that very seriously ill. And I still remember sitting with Anne in a lecture theatre when she'd given a talk on Raynaud's. Jill Belsh was there, I was there, and she said to me, I'm going to do something about this. And of course, she did, as Sue has said, a huge amount. And although I've moved on to do other things, I'm still passionately interested in this disease and making it better. Now, Chris Denton said, would I talk about some of the things I do now, and particularly the political engagement I have. I've worked for a Labour government, a government which, in which there was, of course, both Conservatives and Lib Dems, and now I'm doing some work for the Conservative government. So it's not a political allegiance, but it is an involvement with governments. And you'll see in a moment how I came to do that. But it does impact on chronic disease. And of course, scleroderma is a chronic disease. There are many chronic diseases, but scleroderma is one of those. And does it want to move on? Oh, do I have to orientate it? It is the green one I'm pressing. Fantastic. And of course, for many years, I was trying to do what Jerry Rodden said I should do. I was trying to help the struggle for this really obstinate disease. And you'll hear today that we have made fantastic progress. But of course, most of you will know that the very famous painter, Paul Klee, had scleroderma. The reason I put him in this slide, because you can see from normal hands over on the left-hand side to what his hands looked like as the disease progressed. Obviously, the contractions. Of course, he was a painter. And at the top is the very fine detail painting he could do in the beginning, because he had full hand function. And this was almost the last painting he ever painted, that white mask, which for me represents Raynaud's, and those very, very broad brushes. So this affected his ability to work, to do the work he loved. And he did it for as long as he could, but you can see that it did have an influence. So in the years that I was involved in scleroderma, these were some of the challenges I faced. I knew it was a very uncommon disease, and almost every door I knocked on, people would say, well, it's uncommon, Carol, so not many people get it. And I would say, and the people in the audience, like Alan, who might think it's more further back than that, but I would say it's not until about 20 years ago, maybe 25, that we needed so many more doctors, clinicians, nurses, physios, etc., and many more basic researchers to really make any difference to this disease. You're going to hear that it is a hugely complex disease. GPs really didn't refer until it was late stage, because they knew, as we knew, that we didn't really have a lot of treatments. I was using penicillamine at that time. If it was very inflammatory, I used some steroids. But it was all too late, and we didn't have a regular system of follow-up. And too few drugs, but that has changed. And therefore, for many patients, they had no choice but to stop leading normal lives. And for many people, not all, but for many people, normal lives is taking part in society and having some meaningful activity. Often work, could be volunteering, but it is something that keeps you in contact with everyday life. So their lives were changed enormously, and many had to give up work. And now when I reflect back on my practice all those years ago, I realized I took no interest really in whether they were working or not. I was just much more concerned to get the right investigations done and to get the right treatment. I saw this as a diagnosis, investigation, treatment problem. I just thought that was my main thing. I should have added in living, social engagement at work. I now see it, that is a part of your treatment that should be there. You may not be able to work, but if you wish to work or you wish to do something in the community, we as clinicians should help you do that. Now, the change came in 2006. In 2002, I became the president of the Royal College of Physicians, and I had to start thinking about all of the specialties of medicine. There are 29 physicianly specialties. There may be 30 now, but then there were 29. And one of my specialties was the Faculty of Occupational Medicine. So I had to start to think about work and health. And as a result of that, I became very interested in how you keep people healthy enough to be in work, and particularly if they had a chronic disease. And then in 2006, I had the opportunity to become the National Director for Health and Work, 5-year initiative, quite well funded, in which we were to raise the profile of this agenda, and particularly to raise it with the medical profession and the nursing profession and the allied professions. Of course, I had to start to think differently. I was now working with departments of state, Department of Health, Department of Work and Pensions, the Department of Business, Innovation and Skills, the Cabinet Office, and Number 10. And that is a learning experience indeed. But also, I'd never really worked with business. How did I persuade employers to be flexible about people who had chronic conditions, or to enable people who were taking sick leave to come back to work appropriately, maybe to start with only 1 day a week? And I had to start to work with the trade unions and the voluntary sector. And in the beginning, although thank goodness it changed, working with the trade unions was quite difficult for me, because they had thought I was a dreadful woman who just wanted sick people sent back to work. Whereas what I wanted was people, and so many people have chronic conditions, to have the ability, if they wanted, to be supported to do something within work. And following the end of that job in 2012, since then, I've advised various bits of government. So if you think about all the musculoskeletal conditions, of which scleroderma is one, it is really hard to go back into work if you stopped. So people lose their place in the labour market, and often with that, they lose part of their income because they no longer are earning a salary. And often if you stop work because of your condition, many people find it quite hard to keep their spirits up. It's easy to become more depressed or indeed anxious. So trying to help people stay in work, I always thought was a good thing. And I've been as interested in rheumatoid arthritis and the ability to work as in scleroderma. Scleroderma does not spare any particular class of individuals, whether you're the dustbin man or whether you're the CEO of a company. It is across the spectrum. So if we lose people with scleroderma from the workplace, we're losing human capital. We're losing really able people. And that affects, obviously, the economy, but also those people's sense of self-worth. It is, in my opinion, a complete waste, and we should do our best to stop it. And employers need to be far more flexible and not frightened about employing people with disabilities. And in that, I include any disability. So if you ask me what do you need to make this work well, what are the interfaces that matter? Well, first of all, it's informed clinicians. Anybody who looks after you, being interested, getting the disease under control as quickly and as early as possible, and then helping you, if you so wish, to maintain your contact with the workplace. So I would say that a clinician has not done their job properly if all they do these days is diagnose you, get the right tests, and treat you. It's got to be more than that. I then think we have still a long way to go to persuade employers to create good work and to be flexible. And then we need the patient who's employed with a chronic disease to want to still be there. Because it's very difficult if the patient really feels they do not want to be in the workplace, because you've got to work with the patient. So very briefly, and some of these slides are a little bit detailed, but I'll try and make them simple. There are very few studies that tell us anything about fitness to work in scleroderma, and I've just chosen one. There are some more, but they're telling us more or less the same story. So this was a study that looked at the factors that were influencing people's ability to work. It's a small study, as I say, and I'm simply using it today as an example. 87 scleroderma patients, they looked at their employment status, were they employment or not, what sort of disease, was it diffuse, was it limited, did it have organ involvement? They made some important measures using validated tests of health-related quality of life. They looked at disability and whether people were getting a disability pension, and they looked at things like anxiety and depression. And although it may not be so visible at the back of the room, this just gives you an idea of the mean age, 48. So that is an age when most people are at work or doing something. Disease duration, about 8 years, both limited, more limited than diffuse patients. And then you've just got there the skin involvement, 75% with skin involvement, and for example, 78% with GI involvement. And you can see from this slide, and I hope this is entirely visible there, that scleroderma did affect people's ability to be in work. Full-time employment, 27.6%. Remember, a larger number of these patients did have the limited form of the disease, so possibly more ability to be in work. Only 11% had managed part-time employment. You would like to see that possibility increased. Many said that the diagnosis changed their lives. And of course, many patients were on sick leave. Now, the next slide you can't possibly read. I tried to think, how could I make it better? But actually, you do need most of this information. But it's really looking at those on disability pensions, those with sick leave status, and then looking at certain parameters and organ manifestations. But the message is really at the bottom, that organ manifestations, interestingly, were not greater for patients receiving a full disability pension or for those on sick leave, with the exception of those who had many problems with myalgia. And so you say to yourself, is it something about the patient? Is it something about the extent of the disease? But I think we would have all have expected that organ involvement might have made a much bigger difference. And finally, they again looked at people with a disability pension and no disability pension. And this is looking at the socio-economic burden. And that burden is in occupational changes, decreased income, etc. And many people felt they were discriminated against. So I just wanted to bring that to you, that there is a socio-economic burden with scleroderma, and we are not sure about organ involvement and the effect on unpaid work, so homemakers, was potentially very high. So that's just very briefly that. And then just very quickly, why am I interested in having people in work? Well, a physician many years ago, Galen, said, employment is nature's physician and is essential to human happiness. If you're in good work, and I dislike bad work, and there's not time to go into bad work, but there is bad work, then on the whole, it is good for your health, provides an income, and gives you a feeling of being in society. But also for people with chronic disease, we know from surveys, we know from diseases like cancer, that cancer patients are often very keen to go back to work, because what they say is, it makes me feel normal. I'm back in the society. I've had a dreadful disease. I want to think I can look forward and not backwards. So the ability to return, maybe not full time, but to be part of society, have mates, be in some sort of workplace. It may be volunteering, which is a very good, meaningful activity. That is helpful. And we provided from the Department of Health, I did some work with them on providing advice both to the employee and the employer on how you can adjust things for patients. I also think we need changes in the curriculum for our doctors, because we absolutely need them to understand this equation, because they are important. Every time a physio meets a patient or an occupational therapist meets a patient, there is the opportunity to have an appropriate discussion and to be helpful. So one of my biggest challenges, it still is a challenge, is to raise the importance of work with my fellow medics. So what can employers do? The workplace is a very good place to support people and prevent ill health generally. So I like to think of the workplace being a good place for public health. How do you enable, because it has to be voluntary, people eat more carefully, have more exercise, provide bicycle schemes, maybe a Pilates class or a yoga class, but things that support people and their health needs. And I often talk, I'm not going to talk at all today in detail about good work, but I think for a scleroderma patient, it needs to be safe and stable. You need to feel you've got some control about what you do, where you do it, so that that will make you more comfortable working. Definitely flexible arrangements. The quantity and quality of work has to be adjusted, and there must be fair employment. And the other things are important too. So I've been doing a lot of work with employers, creating good workplaces, so you have to work with the chief executive, the board, and the line managers. And what you're trying to do is empower employees to feel they are in a good place. So what's my work been about since 2006? It's been about improving the mental health, which I haven't discussed today, and physical health of those who are either in the workplace, on sick leave, or are unemployed. And you need to help people return to work. Chris also asked me to say, well, what does it mean being an advisor to government? What does it feel like? Well, it's sometimes difficult, but you have to give them honest, independent advice. And you have to realize they sometimes don't accept it, or indeed want it at that time. Doesn't fit in with the political timing, but you have to give it. And then often it fits in later. You have to be apolitical. I don't think any of the governments I've worked for know what my political leanings are. It's a very good thing. You have to build trust and respect, because if they don't trust you, then you can't work with them. And you have to get used to writing reports in a very different way from ever writing a medical paper. I hope in this area that I've become an ambassador for this agenda. I hope I've become a champion for the cause, and I've tried very hard to get departments to talk to each other, because you can't do this without the Department of Health, Department of Work and Pensions working together. So I've been very, very fortunate. It's been a huge new area of learning and expertise, and it's been a great privilege. And what I think I've also been trying to do, because we're living longer, and in order for us to have a welfare state and support people who can't work, and support children and students, then how do we make it possible for people to be well and in work? So, Chris, I hope that's what you wanted. It isn't the classic treatment or the wonderful things we're going to hear about, but I hope it's something new to think about. Thank you.
Thank you, Carol. I was going to use the word, it's wonderful that we have a champion for health and work now, officially recognised in government, but you used the words yourself, so that's all right. We are running a bit late, but if anybody's got a burning question they want to ask Carol, please do. Stick your hand up and there's a roving mic, or if not, at the coffee break. There's one there, so yes. I can't hear the microphone. Over there.
How do you manage to convince the union they are not trying to make the sick people go back to work?
How do you convince the unions to get sick people to go back to work?
I think over time, and it has been over time, the TUC, for example, has come around a great deal. I think they've produced information that is much more about enabling people to be in work than to be completely anti this. You have to show them the evidence. You have to be very, very patient. This is not anything, and in everything you do, you have to have a TUC or the relevant union rep on that committee or that working party. And the 3 reports I've done for government, we've had strong trade union representation. So you need them to come into the tent not be on the outside, and eventually go with you, and you have to respect the things they find difficult.